I'm so excited to be here today with my really dear friend and colleague, Dr. Leor Roseman, calling in from London via canal. So, maybe to start, can you tell us just a little bit about the work that you do and have been working on specifically the last 8 years?
Yeah, so thanks, Natalie. Fun being with you here. And so I've been working in Imperial College London in the lab of Robin Carrot-Harris and David Nutt. So I did there my master's, my PhD, and now my postdoc. So already 8 years in the lab. Mainly started neuroscientific investigation, so LSD, the influence, the impact of LSD in the brain and different connectivity in the visual cortex, and mainly kind of neuroscientific investigation. And then continued to studying more about like therapy and the kind of the different psychological mechanism around the therapeutic application of psychedelics. So whether it's emotional breakthroughs, catharsis, or the mystical type experience, how they predict the outcomes of therapy, and also different emotional processing during therapy. So that's like my kind of my previous research, let's say, and still currently doing is more neuroscientific and therapeutic. But right now, what I'm currently doing and working also with Natalie is studying groups and specifically groups of Israelis and Palestinians drinking ayahuasca together, but also generally studying groups and kind of the group dynamics under psychedelics. Yeah.
So many cool things. So just to even recap in really basic terms, you're focusing first on neuroscience at Imperial with Dr. Robin Carrot Harris, and was exploring the visual cortex in particular and the psychedelic impact on that. And then you got more into like the therapy side of understanding and the mystical experience, and then started on this amazing work. Well, maybe I'm a little biased because I was lucky to get to work with you on it, but on understanding psychedelics and group processes. So maybe I did want today to ask a little bit about that work. So maybe to start, could you just explain like the basics of the interview research that you've done, kind of set the context?
Sure. So yeah, curious. I was curious about group dynamics, especially also for my own personal kind of journeys. The social realm was always an important part of my own journeys. So I wanted to explore that and explore that specifically in groups of Israelis and Palestinians. So together with Antoine Saka, who's a Palestinian activist, and together with Natalie, so we went to a road trip in Israel, Palestine, and we interviewed different Israelis and Palestinians who drink ayahuasca together. And now it's important to say these groups are not for peace building or reconciliation. They're the regular kind of neo-shamanic ayahuasca practices. It just happens to be that Palestinians also join mainly, usually groups of Israelis. So Palestinians are usually minorities in these groups, and these groups are also like very apolitical because they're very centered on therapy. So they're not necessarily engaging in political discussions,
Cool.
but still that
And
brings a certain energy into the kind of consciousness that's manifested with psychedelics.
totally.
Yeah.
And just for people watching who might be really eager and excited, a paper is coming out very soon about these interviews with Israelis and Palestinians who are drinking ayahuasca together. So we won't get into too much of that today, but the one piece of that I'm really eager to address for this Jewish Psychedelic Summit is I'm curious from your experience interviewing the Jewish Israeli participants, how did you see their ayahuasca experiences and experiences with psychedelics in general impacting or changing their relationship with Judaism?
Yeah, so it can kind of go both ways, and there's like different elements to this. So there are definitely those who got more connected to Judaism, also like those who got more in the groups we studied, also those who got more connected to Islam or more connected to Christianity. But let's say to people a lot of times connect to Islam before it became organized religion, or Christianity before it became organized kind of religion, and also Judaism kind of going into mysticism or basic teachings. So a lot of times people need a certain framework of knowledge and and therefore they connect more to the knowledge that they come from and the background that they come from. So people definitely got connected more to Judaism from the people we studied, but also some people like sometimes are aversive to it, especially in Israel. Like religion is nationalized in a way, and it's serving, also force very strong political forces of occupation and of denying of freedom of other people in the name of religion. So a lot of people are aversive to Judaism because that's it's kind of been used in that way. So a lot of actually people who got connected also to Judaism, sometimes they actually come from a relatively secular, liberal Jewish background, which didn't don't is not connected to Judaism because it's left wing and liberal. But through the ayahuasca practice, sometimes they kind of connect more to Judaism, but they still see it as some like universal portal to universal truth. So they kind of there's a way to connecting to it, but still also respecting other cultures, traditions. That's to say that sometimes it can create, some groups in Israel, ayahuasca groups, can be like of settlers only, and that can also serve forces of like unity within those groups, but not necessarily very much inclusive.
Yeah, so interesting. I remember someone saying something along the lines of they felt a lot more spiritual, but a lot less like dogmatic or like
Yeah,
traditional or something like that. Um,
yeah.
I find really fascinating. And that, when you were speaking, that kind of got me thinking of two different questions I had for you, because I'm really curious in your own experience how your psychedelic personal experiences and this research have both impacted your relationship with Judaism, and especially as an Israeli Jew who then moved outside of Israel. Because, yeah, as you're saying, like, in Israel, Judaism is really associated with a very, it's a very strict understanding of what Judaism is. So I
Mhm.
always find it interesting, Israelis living inside of Israel and outside, how that shifts too.
So I have to have a disclaimer that I'm still exploring. So even things which I say now, I'm not completely like comfortable with. And my own Judaism, coming from a secular family and secular background, is something that I'm still exploring. So I don't really have uh, good answers for this. But I can say that going back to this kind of point of like experience Judaism abroad comparing to Judaism in Israel, I can say that from my psychedelic experiences, it can be quite different. So, like having ayahuasca in Brazil and suddenly hearing like a song in Hebrew, so hearing Eli Eli, and it feels like this kind of beautiful idea of like returning home, and the kind of like I was kind of lost and like in a huge ceremony, doesn't feel connected to anything, and suddenly have this kind of connection to home and belonging to the larger Jewish community felt very profound and very important. And I think it was related also for me being at that moment, the wandering Jew kind of narrative and the idea of like returning, the idea of home is something very beautiful and mystical, and it's powerful. But then in Israel, the returning home is also like this returning home of Jewish people is the dislocation for Palestinians. So it's like that idea becomes much more loaded politically and complex. So connecting to that in Israel is harder for me. Still, I found the beauty, but there are like some challenges. And I think some of the interviewees also talked about these challenges and tension. But there's still like beautiful things happening in Israel in that relation and finding new meaning in Judaism. So the ceremonies, they incorporate those who incorporate Jewish kind of songs and Jewish music. There's something very beautiful and celebratory about it. So doing a kiddush to the ayahuasca and stuff like this, there's something quite beautiful about it.
I have to say that was really striking. The first ceremony that I experienced, or they say "Bore Priha Ayahuasca," it was like wow, and actually
Yeah.
hearing Hebrew prayers saying among Ikaros in a ceremony, totally for me too, had like felt hit a different
Yeah.
place. That's really interesting.
Yeah, there's kind of an attempt, I guess, to kind of go back to the sources, or redefining Judaism in a way. Because there's in Israel, the kind of the narrative of the victim in Judaism is something that doesn't really is already political problematic. It doesn't really serve the unity of it does serve the unity of Jewish people, but it also prevents the freedom from Palestinians. So it's a complex idea. So there's a need to redefine Jewish trauma, or what is the returning for home, or exclusivity of home, or connection to the land, which is like an important part of Judaism is connection to the land of Zion. So also like redefining that, understanding that the land is not just it's not the land of just Jewish Israelis. There's a really need to redefine, and I think ayahuasca is redefining these groups slowly. It's not perfect, but it's like redefining those relationships with the land and with spirituality.
It's so powerful. And yeah, as a diaspora wandering Jew that's never, been someone born and raised in Israel and that a home feeling like Judaism, of course, there's always, it's like almost about this yearning for the land, which is like this really kind of abstract thing. So that is such a different experience of being Jewish, like growing up in the place rather than just talking about this kind of far away thing.
Yeah, exactly.
Um, Wow. And then I guess I have another question, which is that so many we see in Israel psychedelics are seem to be pretty fairly well integrated in society, maybe more so than some other countries. And I'm curious why you think that might be.
I don't know. We love to get out of our minds, I guess. I think it's like related to traveling, the idea, the need to travel. That's kind of like a very speculative thinking about it. But after the army, the Israeli goes out to India or South America, and already there's a psychedelic connection in both places. So in India and Goa, there's already like a psychedelic culture there, and in South America, there's like a psychedelic culture, ayahuasca culture, and then bringing that culture back to Israel. So the Israeli like psytrance is like community is youth, it's mainstream. So psychedelics is not just like a liberal thing. They're like they across the political across the political spectrum. They don't have necessarily like a liberal orientation. The sites, especially through psytrance, and I kind of think it's some of it is the need to kind of to travel like after the army, so it's a bit to shake up the kind of also moral issues that occurred in the army, so the need to kind of just get out of your mind. I think something like that. And also maybe the traveling, in a more spiritual way, the traveling is maybe part of like going back to this wandering Jew. So there's like, maybe we don't really like the place of home so much, so we need to go out of our mind from our country to travel, or we need to go out of our mind, in a psychedelic realm, because we are a culture that's built 2,000 years on being outside of home.
Very interesting. And we
But
also
very speculative. Yeah.
oh, that's really interesting. And we have, thousands of years of intergenerational trauma to face. Now that we're done, if we're not running, then we're like, oh, now we have to face and process all of this stuff. But
Yeah.
wow, well, there's so much to get into, but I know we're trying to keep this concise today. So I'm gonna end with one question kind of in the same
Yeah.
same house. But I'm curious, I know you talked about growing up more secular as an Israeli, but I'm still curious how you understand Judaism having impacted your interest in psychedelics in the first place and your work and all
Yeah.
of it.
So I don't think it's in the first place. I'm not sure Judaism impacted my psychedelic search, but definitely in research, and especially since doing the Israeli-Palestinian research, I'm much more in relationship with that. So even like, and also this is something people kind of reported in the Israeli-Palestinian connection, connecting to the other, to Israeli connecting to Palestinian, and also requires you to start questioning who you are, where you come from, what's your heritage. So I think the project itself made me more reflect on that. And there are definitely Jewish writers that impacted me in some way. Maybe because they're Jewish, maybe because I'm not sure, but I think because they're Jewish, I have a certain other special relationship with them, or just yeah. I think it's like mainly Jewish writers who impacted me. So Buber and Walter Benjamin.
I was gonna say, I think I lied about it being the last question because I forgot. I did really want to ask you about Uber because I've been really grateful over our friendship that you've been able to help share Uber's writing with me. So maybe, yeah, as the last question, if you could speak just a little bit to how Buber resonates with you and how you see as part of his philosophy and framework making sense in your like psychedelic
Yeah.
understanding.
So yeah, so this project came from my need to explore the relational realms. Okay, so as I said, I had like my own journeys where a lot of times the social, the intersubjective relational realm was important, and I felt that just investigating therapy or neuroscience and kind of missing something important of what's important for me as Leor, not as a scientist, but I want to kind of like align those together. So then a friend, Gon Benali, was also performing right in the conference. So he suggested
Speaking
me to
of
read Buber, and then it's like, yeah. So it was like a kind of like like it felt like I found my rabbi, kind of like when I read it, and it also very much resonated with what I was already exploring. It was just like you put in words a lot about the importance of connection. So I and Thou is a book about kind of the spirituality of connection. And in a way, it's a criticism on a lot of things that we see today, like in psychedelic culture and New Age and like perennialism. So it's a book that's full of criticism as well, in order to kind of focus on like what actually is in the center is connection. So it's not inner spirituality, it's not inner experiences. It's about relation. So relation can be with nature, can be human to human, or human to something bigger. But it cannot be a human to himself. There's no such thing as like self connection. There's no such thing as just like inner experiences are important, but they're not the kind of the center of life. So a lot of his writing kind of impacted me and kind of gave me like this framework to think about these things. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And I really appreciated, I mean, so much of what you taught me through Buber, but this idea of the relational aspect, when so much of the psychedelic context and experience is really focused on this all oneness, which, is also a really powerful experience, but actually, you might think that it can also serve people coming together, but could also flatten things sometimes if you like ignore that relational component. So yeah, I also appreciated that. Well, there's so much more, but I know that you're busy, so thank you so much for spending some time with us today to share with the Jewish Psychedelic Summit. Really
cool,
excited for the paper to be published. Yeah, I don't know if
cool.
there's anything else in closing you want to share.
Uh, I don't know. I kind of read, yeah, maybe I'll share that I read recently about like Allen Ginsberg's like trips and their importance to the psychedelic community, and I feel kind of important to share that, like Allen
Cool.
Ginsberg's Jewish, like it's interesting. Leary had like very two Jewish, like Ram Dass, Jewish, and then like Allen Ginsberg, and both of these like are played important part of like who Leary was in a way. But like Allen Ginsberg, he had a messianic trip. Like, so he came back from the Amazon, and after kind of learning about Yahweh in the Amazon with William Burroughs, and he went to Leary and he asked Leary to be his like curandero, to be his like shaman at the same when he did the like a mushroom ceremony. And Leary was like his shaman at the moment, and Ginsberg had this like vision of world peace, and he started running naked in the apartment. It was like a very strong messianic opening, which in a way like messianism is a strong part of like Judaism as well. And I think he was managing to really go into the messianic at the moment, which was important, and then manifesting it into reality. So that's considered the moment in which Leary broke from like Huxley's elitism. So Huxley was suggesting that psychedelics are only for the few, for the chosen few, for the academics, for the philosophers, for the scientists, but not for the people. And in a way, Leary, with all his problems, brought psychedelics, not just him, many other, Ken Kesey and many other, but kind of broke from his academic exclusivism through Ginsberg's like messianic trip. That was like the pivotal moment. And I was reading that, and it felt like very. No, I'm not sure, but like I think Judaism was somehow there. It's hard to really say, but there's like this strong messianic opening.
Wow, I'd love to read this trip report. I want to put it on the Jewish Psychedelic Summit website. That's super. I didn't even, my father's name is Allen Ginsberg, not related that I know of, but I definitely am always eager to hear more about Allen Ginsberg's
Cool.
psychedelic advocacy and experiences.
Cool.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Okay, I guess I do have one final question. Sorry, the problem with interviewing your dear friends. Um, have you ever had a psychedelic experience with like Jewish imagery?
Yes, yeah, with like Star of David, like kind of all over like a pattern in blue and gold. Had that. I think mainly that. I mean, I might need to maybe think more, but I think that's the one that kind of pops into my mind.
Cool. That's
Yeah.
pretty strong.
Oh, and Holocaust. Yeah, I was in the Holocaust,
Oh yeah.
but that's quite common. It's usually black and white, and it was like black and white for me as well. Like a
Wow.
black and white experience in the Holocaust while I'm in the jungle.
Oof. Wow. Well, thank you. And thanks for that extra nugget about Allen Ginsberg. I'm excited to read that trip report. Thank you
Uh-huh.
so much for joining us. And I hope I get to see you soon. An early Mazal Tov. Lior's about to be a father for a second time.
Cool.
So
Thank you.
I'll see you soon.
Oh, thank you very much. Bye bye.
Bye.